I wanted to talk about this today. It is a refresh. It's not a fully new design. Every year we would completely redesign some of our laptops, and really like to show those off. And some of them get um, updated internals, but carry over the design from last year. This is carrying over the physical design from last year, but I would argue that it's actually still a pretty massive upgrade with the new features that have been added. Okay, chassis design is the same. Here it is. Boom. This is the G14. And actually, I have one sec. Eh.
Oh, baby.
It's the same. Same. It looks the same.
He's dual wielding.
I'm dual wielding at the moment. So you can see that it looks the same at first blush. It's got that extra large trackpad, 16 by 10 display, custom vapor chamber with liquid metal, aluminum heat sink on the bottom. Like it's just kind of this bare aluminum on the bottom to dissipate heat, which is nice. And of course, the slash design here with the holes on the front. Just like other models of G14, some have this prismatic film underneath, which you can see kind of like glinting in the light, which is awesome. And some have the anime matrix display, which is our this customizable array of LEDs underneath that you can like create your own animations or choose from one of the animations that we have on there. One of the very small differences that I'm going to point out, last year's G14 has this badge on the bottom that's kind of like this really cool, like purplish blue metal. This year's is actually just straight silver. Yeah, it's got like a little bit, like depending on how it shines in the light, you'll get a little bit of that rainbow tint, but most of the time it's just kind of silver. I kind of dig it. At first I was like, oh, I liked the blue, but actually you still get that like cool like rainbow reflection in certain light. And the silver look does match the overall vibe of the white G14 a little bit better. It looks a little bit cleaner. So I like that. Now, all of that said, the internal hardware has been upgraded. So we're still using an AMD Ryzen CPU on this model. This time it's been upgraded to a Ryzen 9 7940HS, which has 8 cores, 16 threads, and boosts up to 5.2 gigahertz, which is a lot. But the kind of big internal upgrade is the GPU. So last year was an all AMD machine, AMD CPU, AMD GPU. And it was a great machine, but this year we're back to NVIDIA. And we went all out with it. The highest GPU you can get in this is an RTX 4090 laptop GPU.
A 14-inch device.
On a 14-inch, yeah. So now it is a 14-inch thin and light. So it's running that 4090 at 125 watts, which is, so that's going to be a little bit lower power than the 175 watts that you would get in a 4090 on like the strict SCAR 16. But I can tell you, the 4090 in this thing still rips compared to other laptop GPUs on the market. Even at 125 watts, it's nuts. So it's well worth what you're like. The performance is just insane. And we've seen this in the desktop 40 series cards too. Like our desktop 4090s, you can turn down the power limit like a lot, and it's still just so crazy efficient. You still get massive amounts of performance. So it's everything I could want in a 14-inch laptop. 16 gigabytes of DDR5 on board, soldered in, and then there's a slot where you can expand the memory. Some models will come with another 16 gigs SODIMM in there for a total of 32 gigs, but you can also upgrade that yourself, as well as the storage, which tops out at 1 terabyte at retail. So if you want a 2 terabyte drive in there, you can go buy one and pop it in. Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.3, 76 watt hour battery with USB Type-C charging, one of my personal favorite features. I love being like, it still has the barrel connector for when you're gaming on high power, but then if you're just using it for like work or whatever, you can plug in the same Type-C cable you would use to charge your Ally, which is what I always do. This machine has it all. Yes, just one NVMe slot on this because it is a more compact 16 or 14-inch device. It only has one NVMe slot. If you want something with two, I would look at like the strict SCAR 16 or 18. Some of those larger machines that have a little bit of a higher power envelope, a little bit more room inside to have, two expandable RAM slots, two NVMe slots. It depends on the just the size of the laptop. There's only so much that we can fit into something that because it's really thin and light, you guys.
It's like so small.
This thing is It's for a gaming machine with a 4090 in it. Like you would not believe how thin this thing is. I have a Strix here somewhere. I could reach and get it, but just trust me, it's not quite as thin as the Flow X13, but it has a 4090 in it. Give me a break. And that's one of the things that just might edge this out over the Flow X13 for me. The Flow X13 has what, like a 4060 or something in it? I don't remember now. Which is great for like on the go gaming, and you can plug in the XG Mobile if you want more. But man, for me, having like the full power of a 4090 in the laptop, like all in one, is just nuts. For portable gaming, like when
just
want to
jump in. We had a question from YouTube. The XG Mobile port is not on the G14, correct? It is only the Flow series and the Ally.
And the Ally. Wow. Okay. I stand corrected. The Flow X13 this year has a 4070 laptop GPU in it.
That's still incredible.
Yes, I was. Yeah, I thought it was a 4060. 4070 is even better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, Fabulous 66 says, "Is this really the 4 power of a 4090 though?" Again, the whole way that laptops work is that it scales with the size of the laptop. So it is not, like I said, it is not the maximum power you can get from a 4090 laptop GPU. That would be like something on our Strix SCAR machines where you can go up to 175 watts. Mm-hmm. But for even at 125 watts, like I said, this thing rips. Like, trust me. And for me personally, the smaller size of the laptop is worth it because I only use my laptop when I'm being really portable, right? When I'm going on a work trip or something like that and I'm carrying it around. So I want something thin and light. But if you want something with maximum power, go with something like the Strix SCAR. You're going to get even more power out of that with a 4090. All that said, the biggest difference this year to me is not even necessarily the 4090. The biggest difference on this year's G14 is the display. So last year, our G14 had our ROG Nebula display, which, if you guys remember, is kind of our like catch-all term for any display that is really, really good, right? It's got to meet certain standards like 100% DCI-P3 color space. It's got to be a certain resolution, certain refresh rate. It's got to be fast, bright, and vivid. This year's model ups the ante even further with a Nebula HDR display. That's the one with a mini LED panel for like the true gorgeous HDR experience. Now, since this is a 14-inch display, it is using a slightly different panel than the Nebula HDR display on like the Strix SCAR X16 or the Flow X16. So, and I wanted to clear up a little bit of confusion about that. So the Nebula HDR display on the G14, they don't all come with a Nebula HDR display, but the models that do come with one are capable of 600 nits of peak brightness and have 504 mini LED dimming zones powered by our Nebula HDR engine. Now, I've seen some people confused about the fact that this is, an HDR 600 display compared to the Strix's HDR 1000 display. But I don't want people to confuse VESA's display HDR certifications with the actual specs of the display. So if you look at VESA's actual certification standards, I think we have a page on that Jake can bring up. So Jake, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see, you've got HDR 400, HDR 600. You can click on those to see the different specifications, 800, 1000, I think it's 1400 there. I have a little trouble reading it.
Yep.
So if you click on those, you can see like what that certification required. But VESA's display HDR does not only encompass like these 4 or 5 sets of specs. Okay. It's not like there are only 4 or 5 displays out there and it's either 400, 600, 500. Yeah, that's 405, 600, 1000. That's not how it works. It's a spectrum. So each of these certifications only denotes the minimum specs required to get that certification. So you can have 2 displays that are vastly different from one another, but still are both VESA Display HDR 600. So that certification doesn't tell the whole story. One of the big parts of it is the amount of nits that it can produce. And yes, the G14 is capable of 600 nits of peak brightness, which actually for this display this size is plenty. I watched some movie clips on it last night, like Mad Max Fury Road. I played a little bit of the new Forza Motorsport, which the HDR on that is gorgeous. And it looked incredible on this. Plenty bright, trust me, you get a super punchy image that goes way beyond what SDR provides. Like it's night and day difference. Okay. You don't get quite as much highlight detail as you would on like the Strix Scar with its 1000 nits. But again, it's a smaller display. It's plenty bright. It looks incredible in real life. Trust me. Here's where I think some of that confusion lies. VESA's Display HDR 600 certification requires, at minimum, some sort of local dimming in addition to the 600 nits of peak brightness. And that's good because local dimming is one of the most important parts of getting that really good HDR experience, particularly on a non-OLED display. So if you have an LED display, you want those dimming zones to dim down. Milky Ice, shut up. I see you. You want those dimming zones to be able to dim down so that you can get areas of the image that are really dark, that are pure black. Because if it's just full backlight, some of those blacks might look a little gray. So local dimming is really important. But the HDR 600 standard doesn't really like specify how the local dimming has to be implemented. So there are HDR 600 displays out there with like only 16 zones of edge-lit local dimming. So it's just like it's straight up and down. The zone is like a whole column of the display. That's nice. It's better than nothing, but it's not even close to the same level as what the display in the G14 offers. Remember, this is mini LED. So it's full array local dimming, and it has 504 zones. That's a huge, huge difference between a display that has an edge-lit 16 dimming zones, both of which are Display HDR 600. So when you combine those 504 zones with our Nebula HDR engine algorithm, there's very little blooming on this display. I was in a pitch black room last night, and I was looking hard for it, and it was very difficult. When watching regular content, there's very little blooming. It is super punchy. It looks truly, truly amazing. So like I bring this up because I don't want people to get caught up too much in the VESA standards. They're useful as a starting point, but the actual specs of the display are what really matter. And that's one of the reasons that we created our Nebula HDR badge. We didn't want people to have to be bogged down in specs, counting nits and counting zones. We wanted something that's noted that, okay, if you see the Nebula HDR badge, you know it is a true HDR display and that it's going to be really, really good. That it's one of the best laptop displays on the market specifically for HDR. And so in a way, it's like it almost goes beyond these certifications because it's binary. It's either Nebula HDR and it's going to look amazing, or it's not. There's like no in between. It isn't skimping on anything. If it doesn't meet our standards for true HDR, our standards, it will fall into the standard Nebula display line, which is also an excellent display, but it's mostly geared toward SDR content. So they're not going to give you that top-notch HDR experience. Nebula displays are still great. At this point in my life, I would not buy a laptop without a Nebula display, personally. To me, it's just not worth it. That extra color gamut, knowing that I have that high resolution and refresh rate and response time is crucial. I can't go lower than a Nebula display. But if I can get a Nebula HDR display, I'm gonna, because then I can like watch movies on it on the plane or in a hotel, and it's gonna look as good as my TV over here, which actually has far fewer zones than this laptop does. So yeah, I know that was a lot of me ranting, but I really wanted to make sure that that was clear, because when this first came out, I saw some people go like, oh, it's only HDR 600. That's not great. Like, no. HDR 600 is just the minimum spec. This goes way beyond that in a lot of ways.
Knowledge
is power. So,
G14
with all that
is
said,
power.
The G14 is crazy powerful with that 4090. If you get the 4090 model. So now the one thing is the 4090 model with the Nebula HDR display does not have the enemy matrix. So you do have to choose between whether you want the enemy matrix or the Nebula HDR display, because that mini LED, it takes a little bit more room to have that full array of LEDs as opposed to just along the edge. So we couldn't fit the enemy matrix in there at the same time without redesigning the chassis and making it thicker. That said, the prismatic film, I forgot how good this looks. It's so dope. I get almost as many compliments on this as I do on the enemy matrix, if you can believe it. Like, people really
it's
dig
such a
both
simple
of them.
thing, but it's a nice, clean aesthetic that isn't necessarily gamery. And the enemy matrix doesn't have to be gamery. You could have it be a Nike logo if that's what you want, right? Whatever you're into. I'm just saying, like, you can put Pikachu there. You can put whatever you want. If you're really into Nike,
I don't know if you know this. Pokemon was a video game before it was a card game, Jake.
What did I say it was a card game?
I don't know. I'm just making fun of you.
Okay.
But you're right. The prismatic film, it gives it that like extra kind of flair that like it makes it look different than all other laptops, right? Like it stands out, but it doesn't stand out in the same way as like the Anime Matrix does. So if you want something a little bit more subtle that still stands out, it's an awesome option. And for me, the Nebula HDR display is fully worth it. Sasko first says Whitson is on fire today. Yeah, I'm really fired up about this. I get really like
he's way too passionate about the G14, guys. Don't fuel him.
No, this is the thing. It's not just that I'm passionate about the G14. It's that I'm also really passionate about display tech and HDR in particular. I used to review gaming monitors, and I did a little bit some HDR TVs too. And I get really fired up about really good HDR displays. And so when you put a really good HDR display in my favorite laptop of all time, I lose my shit. I can't keep it in. You know?
It just flows right out. Guys, here's my cat, super low pixel.
Just not even looking.
I just felt the need to do it. He's I don't know where his head is. It could be in either direction. Could be anywhere.
Anyway, so that is this year's G14. In my opinion, it is the greatest laptop ever made. But if you're not into thin and lights, we also have other options for you. That Nebula HDR display is also available on the Scar 16 and the Flow X16. So we now have one Nebula HDR display. Oh, and on the M16. I forgot.
M16 is, in my opinion, the laptop of the year. That device is like, I like the darker.
The darker color looks awesome.
Slightly darker color. You also get that prismatic effect on it, which looks really pops on the dark color, I feel.
Well, and it's you get a little bit more power with the M16. So if you're willing to go like a little bit bigger, you get that bigger screen, so it's even more immersive. You get the 1000 nits version of the screen too, which is a tiny bit better. And then you get I believe you have a higher wattage on the 4090 on the M16
you do.
as well.
Yeah. But it's a bigger device, so you pack a little bit more power in it. That's how it goes.
But it's still thin and light. It's still smaller than the Scar.
It is.
It's still smaller
it is
than
quite
a lot
thin.
of gaming laptops out there. So.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't realize until just now that I explained this. We have a Nebula HDR display in at least one laptop from each of our 3 families. That's pretty awesome.
That's amazing.
We love to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every year
so there
gets
you
better.
Go. If you were at all on the fence about this year's Nebula HDR display, or this year's G14, sorry, I got distracted by Milky Ice in chat. Stop distracting me, Milky Ice in chat. He clipped my telling him to shut up.
Yep, and it'll get cycled forever.
Yep, looking forward to it. I stand by it, Milky Ice. Anyway, that is it for our look at the G14 today. Thank you guys for hanging out. We will see you next time.